What is up, guys? MinishCap1 here with a Season 14 Singed item guide. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm a multi-season Challenger Singed one-trick in Seasons 5, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, and 13. I have been one-tricking Singed going on 11 years this year, which is kind of insane. It's been a long time, and I'm very, very excited and very, very happy to bring you this guide, and also very excited and very happy about Season 14 so far. So this is just an items guide, but there is going to be a lot, and I mean a lot of information here, so feel free to leave the video on in the background or while you're sleeping, just to try and absorb as much information as you can. I'm going to be going over starting items, boots, components, AP items, as well as defensive items. I have information on 25 completed items, 16 components, and some full build examples. 3 quick points before we begin. 1. Singed has some of the most versatile itemization in the entire game. And because of this, he has only one true core item, which is Leandry's. However, unlike most champions with their core items, you aren't going to necessarily rush this every single game, but you will be buying it eventually, item 1 or item 2, or maybe item 3 depending, in every single game. 2. Itemization in itself is a skill on Singed. It is very possible to buy the wrong item at the wrong time. You need to always think about what your next purchase will be, from the completed item all the way down to a component level, about what the next best thing to buy is. I'll go over this in much more detail in the actual item breakdowns. 3. With the Season 14 update, Singed has gone from having some pretty underwhelming and unsatisfying items with a lack of good choice, to now having some really great, really satisfying, and really fun options, as well as lots of great tertiary choices as well in the later parts of the game. So for your starting items, your trinket is going to be Stealth Ward, the yellow trinket, for top lane in 99.99% of your games, until you eventually swap to the blue trinket level 9 if you think you don't want to face check bushes. Alright, so here's the important part. Doran's Ring 2 potions is one of your several starting options. The benefit of going Doran's Ring plus 2 potion is that this start gives you the highest combination of stats possible. You get 90 HP on the ring, plus 18 ability power. You get the mana regeneration, which is quite great on Singe. This is awesome. It helps prevent you from needing to buy a C-pot later on. Actually, you can't buy a C-pot at all, because you are, I forgot, now limited to 1 starting item. So there you go. Unless you're going to go stack 1 ring of each, so that is also an option. The other benefit of the Doran's Ring 2 potion start is that you have 2 health potions, which are going to give you 120 health each, whereas a refill potion is going to give you 2 charges of 100 HP. So you end up having 40 additional health off of 2 health potions, which is quite nice for the early game. This is probably the best all-around start on Singed. If you don't know what else to buy, you really can't go wrong with this start. This is the most solid start on Singed. Alright, your other option for as far as having AP level 1 is going to be Dark Seal and Refill Potion. So, Dark Seal and Refill Potion, I run over Refill Potion, it's 150 gold, Dark Seal is 350 gold, and this gives you 200 HP on 2 charges, 100 HP times 2 charges, so 200 total HP regen, and Dark Seal is going to be 350 gold for 15 AP and 50 health. The benefit of this start over the Doran's Ring and 2 potion start is you are saving 150 gold by buying your refill potion at level 1, because normally what you do on your first back after getting Doran's Ring and 2 potions is you buy a refill potion, okay? However, because you're going to be saving gold with this start, you get this at level 1 instead. And then you get a Dark Seal as well. You're going to have 3 less AP and 40 less HP, so you have less sustain, and you are going to be less squishy, or you have less sustain and you're squishier with a little bit of lower wave clear, and that does matter on Singed compared to going Doran's Ring and 2 potions. So you're giving up quite a bit of stats and regen. What are you getting in as a benefit? You are going to be getting a economic lead over going 2 health potions plus Doran's Ring. So you're going to save 50 gold on Dark Seal compared to Doran's Ring, and you're going to save 150 gold. Well, actually, you're going to save closer to 250 gold going refill potion compared to going 2 health potions. The reason why you're saving 250 gold and not 150 gold is because 2 health potions cost 100 gold by themselves, and then you would have to spend an additional 150 to buy your refill potion on your first back. So you're going to save 250 gold plus 50 gold on your Dark Seal for a total of about 300 gold that you can save, which means that you could potentially get your boots on your first back. The downsides are, again, you're going to be a lot squishier. You're going to have less sustain. You're going to have no mana regen, so you can go pretty easily with this start if you're not experienced on Singed. My recommendation to you out of these two starts, especially if we're just learning Singed, is to go Doran's Ring and 2 health potions every game. The situations in which you would go Dark Seal Refill is when you are very confident that you're not going to get behind in lane if you understand your matchups. Matchup guide coming soon, by the way. If you understand your matchups, or if you are against a ranged top laner. Now, the reason why you would go this start versus ranged top laners is because a lot of the time versus ranged top laners, you're going to want to force a proxy, either by skipping the first wave entirely, or just pushing as hard as you can and trying to proxy. That way, you're going to get much more value out of a refill potion because you're going to be recalling a lot more and getting a lot more potion charges out of this, as opposed to getting a Doran's Ring 2 health potion start. And because you're recalling a lot more, the mana regen loss doesn't matter as much. However, versus melee matchups, which is what the majority of you guys will be playing against in lower elos, you're going to want to go Doran's Ring and 2 health potions. So Doran's Ring and 2 health potions is going to give you the largest combination of stats, sustain, lane staying power, and potentially proxy power, and just mana regen, everything, right? That's the benefit of this. It's the best overall start versus melee champions, and if you don't know what else to buy, just buy Doran's Ring 2 potions. However, if you're a bit more experienced on Singed, and you're not afraid of potentially taking the risk of losing your lane before your first recall, or you're against a ranged top laner and you need to just Scorched Earth proxy, save as much gold as possible, get boots as fast as possible, rush your items, get an eco lead where you normally wouldn't be able to, then you go Dark Seal Refill. That's how I think about these two starts. Alright, you have 2 other options for starting items though. Seapot. Not as big of a fan of Seapot ever since they nerfed it. I think it was in Durability Update in Season 12. This used to give more sustain. It used to be, I think, 120 health per charge and 75 mana. It's down to 100 health per charge and 75 mana. So this will actually give you the most health sustain because this is 300 health on your potion. Now, if you think about it, the amount of total health that you would get from Doran's Ring and 2 potions is going to be 240 plus 90, which is going to be more than 300 from Corrupting Potion. However, again, these are consumable potions, the red potions, so you will lose these when you use them. But a Seapot, you can recharge it. The downside of Seapot start is that you have no additional AP. And that can be quite bad for Singed early game, because the reason why you need early AP is to make sure that you're getting your waves cleared, that you're last hitting minions, that you're able to push waves when you need to, and you're able to last hit under your turret when you need to, because Doran's Ring, guess what, also has the 5 additional physical damage to minions. The benefit of Seapot is that you have a refillable, sustain-oriented option if you know that you're in a matchup where you can't push forward. Great examples of this are going to be like Darius, Urgot, champions that are just going to be able to kind of kill you in lane, right? However, once you start getting the hang of Singed, you can always play D-Ring and 2 potions into those champions as well. So then what is the benefit of Seapot? Again, the benefit here is an eco lead. In lanes where you want to gain an economic advantage, but you don't need the ability power of Dark Seal plus Refill Potion, then potentially get Corrupting Potion. If you're looking to proxy, I'd actually recommend going Dark Seal Refill over getting Seapot, because this has Dark Seal Refill has ability power. And don't forget, you can also always proxy with Doran's Ring 2 Potion. It just depends on what your matchups are and what your preference is for starting items. Honestly, I think that Corrupting Potion is outclassed by these other 2 starts. The situations in which you would want Corrupting Potion is when you know you're going to be basically hyper defensive against a melee champion and you're not going to proxy, which is not very often. One of the few matchups I go against by this starting item is against Darius, right? Your final starting option is going to be boots, tier 1 boots, and refillable potion. I personally I love this start because this gives you the largest possible eco lead, because instead of actually going Dark Seal Refill and then getting boots on your first back, what you can actually do with boots and refill is now, especially with Amp Tome being 400 gold instead of 435, Amp Tome first back, and now you're on your way to your first item that much faster. This is the biggest possible economic lead if you want to get your items as quickly as possible. However, this start also has the lowest sustain, the lowest ability power, the lowest mana regen, because you will actually spend more mana to clear waves than you would if you had a Dark Seal, because you have less AP. The only benefit of this start is that you do have movement speed. There are a few matchups where this comes into play. However, it's not going to be the difference maker versus the vast majority of matchups that you guys will be playing against, especially melee champions. And especially in lower ratings, enemy champions will not really even, any players I should say, will not be good enough to even care about the fact that you have higher movement speed. It's not going to make a difference to them, whether or not you have movement speed. Whereas if you're playing in a much higher elo, a player might realize that you have movement speed and, you know, have a harder time fighting you because, one, you're more mechanically skilled if you're in higher elo, and you're able to actually, you know, dodge skill shots, kite in melee range, things like that. The point of this start is to be as sneaky and annoying as possible and have the biggest possible eco advantage to start building your components as fast as possible. It is also the hardest, in my opinion, starting setup because you have none of the stats that you would traditionally want with early game. Again, you have low sustain, you have low damage, low ability power, no mana regen at all. So traditional laning stats are just not really here, which makes your early game very difficult, and Unsinged is already a champion that has a hard early game. But if you're able to pull it off, and like I said, I love going this start when I can, don't recommend it. I do not recommend it to you. I want to get that clear. I don't recommend it to you until you are experienced. But it is the largest possible economic advantage that you can get in the early game, assuming you're able to overcome the difficulties of already, one, playing a weak early game champion, and two, having a very weak early game start. So to summarize, I recommend for 99.9% of you guys in the majority of your games to start Doran's Ring and 2 potions. This is the best setup versus melee champions and melee matchups in general. And if you're feeling a little spicy, if you have a bit more experience on Singed, or if you're playing versus a ranged matchup and you want to skip that first wave to proxy, or you just want to hard push the first wave as fast as possible, first 2 waves, and then just recall and start buying your tier 1 boots, etc., then I recommend going Dark Seal Refill. I've gone over the pros and cons of all these starting setups, and I would generally recommend either Doran's Ring 2 potion or Dark Seal Refill, and I would lean towards recommending you guys Dark Seal Doran's Ring plus 2 potions. Alright, moving on, we have boots. Now, boots on Singed is a very, very, very important decision in every game. Also, as far as boots are concerned, you can in fact rush your tier 2 boots before you start to work on your first completed item, meaning your first legendary item down here. And the reason why this is so great on Singed, this is also very common in much more competitive regions like Korea and China, to rush tier 2 boots first, is because it gives you the fastest speed to get to a fight. It gives you the fastest speed to run back to your lane, which is really important on Singed. And for Singed in particular, movement is target access on Singed. You have no gap closers on this champion, and having a higher flat amount of movement speed actually benefits your passive the most. Your passive is a 25% amplification of movement speed, so getting high amounts of flat movement speed, such as the 60 off of Boots of Swiftness and then the 45 of these other 3, Tabby, Mercs, and Storks potentially, is very helpful for your passive as well. Having a higher tier of boots earlier on in the game helps you outspeed your opponents, it helps you outpace them, helps you outfarm them, which macro in Season 14 is much more important now because of the existence of Void Grubs in the early game, and being able to get proper back timings, being able to cut waves and do these things to help pin your enemy laner under their turret is going to be very important, which, again, that information will come in my full guide as well, which will be released in a while after this video. So, the individual boots. We have, our choices are going to be, for the majority of games, Boots of Swiftness, Tabbies, well, plated steel caps, I'll call them Tabbies, and Merc Treads. Your luxury option is going to be Stork Shoes, and I'll go over that later. So, Boots of Swiftness. These are going to be, in the majority of your games, the default boots for Singed. Why are these the default boots for Singed? So, Boots of Swiftness gives the highest flat movement speed, which is the highest synergy with Singe's passive, and because Singed has no gap closers, being able to move quickly is very important, just to get from point A to point B. Also, these boots, in my opinion, were sleeper buffed in Season 14. Let me show you why. So in Season 14, look at this. We have way more open areas like this, where we just have straight lines to run through. And having straight lines to run from point A to point B like this benefits flat movement speed, such as with swiftness boots. So having more open areas, having more straight lines to run through means flat movement speed, and just movement speed in general is better. The map has much more open areas like this to fight compared to what we had in every previous season. The walls have been redesigned with a much more like tactical approach in mind. Like I think the map redesign from Riot has been I said a lot of good things about Season 14 already, but the map redesign has been absolutely awesome. It's been so much fun. But the gist of it is there's just way more open areas to fight in, meaning that flat movement speed is just going to be just great for Singed generically. And these already were kind of just the generically best boots on Singed, but there's just one additional reason to buy them now. If you don't know what boot to buy on Singed, this is literally never a bad choice. Now, there's a lot of situations, where it might not be the best choice. There are times where Tabby or Mercs are going to be more optimal, for sure. However, buying Swiftness and you don't know what else to buy is not going to be a bad decision. This can hurt you. Remember what I talked about in the intro? You can buy the wrong item at the wrong time. That's possible. Like if they have a ton of CC, if they have Morgana and Lux, for example, or Braum, or a Thresh, and you go, or a Thresh and you don't have Phase Rush, and you go Swiftness Boots instead of Merc Treads against those champions, well, now there's a high chance you get CC locked, right? And that can become an issue. However, you know, with that being said, you can get tenacity in your runes and stuff like that, and you can get Phase Rush to help shrug off Thresh's slows and things like that. Supports are going to be the biggest crowd control abusers against Singed in general, so always bear that in mind. You're going to be buying your boots with the enemy team comp in mind. Generically, Swifties will be the best, gives you the highest target access. They're sleeper buff because of the large amount of straight lines to run in across the map, and they have the best synergy with Singe's passive as well. However, if we are unsure about Swifties, say for example they have a lot of auto attackers, maybe they have a Tryndamere top lane, maybe they have an Ashe, Ashe support and a Jhin AD carry, maybe their jungler is Graves, right? Maybe they just have a lot of physical damage, a lot of auto attackers, and obviously you're going to want Ninja Tabbies, plated steel caps, the armor and the damage reduction from auto attacks. It's just too important versus team comps like that. Now, a really important distinction is where is the line? How many auto attackers is going to be the line between where you would buy Swifties and where you would buy Merc Treads? There's not really a concrete line. You're kind of going to play it by feel. What I like to do, the way I think about it is, if they have, 2 to 3 auto attackers, that's about the highest amount usually that you get in a game. Sometimes they have these weird cheesy 580 carry comps, but around 2 auto attackers is when I start to think about buying Tabby, and if one of them or both of them gets fed, then I'm buying Tabby for sure. However, if they have 2 plus auto attackers and they're not fed, Swifties. If they have 2 auto attackers, only one of them is fed, Swifties. If they have no auto attackers and none of them are fed, Swifties. If they have 2 auto attackers and they're both fed, Tabby. If they have 5 auto attackers, no matter what, if they're fed or not, Tabby. If they just have an absolute whack ton of physical damage, and they'll happen to auto you every so often, Riven, plus maybe a Xin jungle, Tabby. That being said, though, these will help you more if you're behind, and Swifties will help you more if you're ahead. Swifties will also help you more if you're even as well, whereas the defensive value of Tabby is going to make a lot of difference in just that being defensive, right? That's not to say that Tabbies don't help you if you're ahead. Everything helps you if you're ahead. That's the nature of item progression in League of Legends, no matter what. Usually, unless you're going to do something stupid and buy AD. But no matter what, generally, an item is always going to help you. But with Singed, there is always situations where buying the wrong item can hurt you. So let's say, for example, they have a Darius top lane, and then their jungler is, we'll say Evelynn or Lilia. Their mid laner is going to be Syndra, or maybe their mid laner is even something a little bit, we'll say Fizz, right? And then their bot lane is going to be, what's a good example for this? Their bot lane's like Tristana, plus maybe a kiting support like Soraka, right? what would you buy in a game like that? You have two champions like the Lilia and the Syndra or Orianna mid lane where you want to go Merc Treads. They have a bot lane which has a decent amount of auto attack damage with the AD carry, but the support doesn't have a lot of CC because it's Soraka or a Nami or Lulu like that, right? But their top laner is a physical damage threat like Darius. Well, I've identified several slows on that team comp between their bot lane and their top lane. You might not need Merc Treads unless their magic damage dealers are very fed or they just have a lot of CC. And the single AD carry comp, the single auto attacker comp, is not going to call for Tabby, right? So in a game like that, you'd go Swifties. This is why I say that generically the best boots on Singed is going to be Swifties, especially if you don't know what else to buy, because they're gonna fit into the widest array of enemy team comps. On Singed, you're always going to be itemizing towards the enemy team comp. That's the most important skill on Singed in terms of his items, is reactively itemizing on the fly according to their comps, right? So that being said, that's kind of the difference between going Swifties and Tabby. What about Merc Treads? Merc Treads is the same situation as Tabby, except if they have AP damage, or sorry, if they have magic damage and CC. So, Kennen top lane, Taric support, Braum support, great against them. Heavy CC mage supports like Zyra, Xerath, mid laners like Twisted Fate that could have really good lockdown for champions like Singed, Ryze, Lissandra top lane as well, Ryze top lane as well, right? Vladimir in the soul lane, I guess. Even if it doesn't have a lot of CC, it's magic damage, right? So you can look at Tabby and Merc Treads as a way to get armor and MR, as well as a way to reduce auto attack damage and to have tenacity. I do find Merc Treads on Singed to be a bit more situational because people just don't tend to run multiple AP threat team comps, and people don't really tend to run heavy CC team comps, even in Hilo, that much anymore, because people are just really playing pub stomp solo queue champions for the last few years. So I'm not saying these are bad on Singed. They're obviously great on Singed. These are one of the three most important boots on Singed between Tabby, between Swifties, Tabby, and Mercs, right? And these are your three most standard boots on Singed. But that being said, there's definitely a case to be made for Swifties being the most valuable, followed by Tabby, followed by Mercs. But if they have a lot of magic damage and a lot of CC, then you go on Mercs. A lot of physical and a lot of auto attack, Tabby. Mixture of kind of everything, take tenacity in your runes, and grab Swifties. Alright, the luxury option. This is the spicy option, is Sorc Shoes. You go with Sorc Shoes when you need to deal damage, and that's it. These are not as important in Season 14 as they were before. There was an argument to be made in the past 3 years in Season 11, 12, and 13 that these were more important back then because our items lacked meaningful damage. However, now in Season 14, we have access to like Liandry's and Riftmaker, and we have Crypt Bloom, Void Staff, Zhonya's has more AP, Deathcap has more AP as well, right? So all of these things are going to be giving you much more value in terms of your damage output than what they used to, especially because of Liandry being such a great core item. That Sorc Shoes are kind of falling out of favor for that reason, in my opinion. Still something you might want to experiment with if you're kind of into, you know, dueling and snowballing and playing lots of Ignite Singed and just trying to get as ahead as possible and have as much poison damage as possible and just magic penetration. I want to fight. I want to blow people up. Things like that, right? It's possible you can buy these boots and make them work. It's never like well, actually, it can be the worst option on Singed. But if you just want damage, it's never a bad option. However, generally, these first three boot choices will outclass them. Alright, so let's talk about component items. Component items, you have either made your first recall and you want to start buying your first item, or you have made a few recalls, you've bought your tier 2 boots alongside your starting items and you want to start buying your first item. What you are going to be looking for in your components is obviously thinking about what the first legendary item that you want to rush is, and then deciding which components within that legendary item are the best ones to buy first. So, like I said in the intro, Liandry's is Singed's only true core item. However, you're not going to be buying it first every game. I'll talk about that more when I get to it, but the gist is Liandry's is going to be your best option versus melee champions and melee laners, whereas either Rylai's or Rocket Belt will be your best option versus ranged champions and ranged laners. However, Rylai's is also going to be great versus champions that want to chase you, like Darius. But, again, I'll get to that when I get to that. So, component items. The biggest change in... We have 2 big changes, actually. Well, I guess we have 3. Maybe 4 big changes in component items for Singed. Is... Amplifying Tome is now going to be 400 gold, down from 435, and it still gives the full 20 AP. And Haunting Guys is a thing again, as well as we're going to be building a lot more of Hextech Alternator this season as well. And now Seeker's Arm Guard is 1600 gold, and it also gives you the Stopwatch active, / Zhonya's active, but it breaks, and you just build it into Zhonya's afterwards. Does not build out of a rune. So we'll go from left to right all the way across these component items, and I'll try and be brief, but give you all the information that's relevant. Amplifying Tome down to 400 gold. This builds into basically every single Singed item that he needs. Builds into Leandry's, Rylai's, Rift, Rocket Belt, Cosmic. Builds into Magic Pen items. Builds into Zhonya's. Builds into Shadow Flame. Does not build into Roa. Does not build into Death Cap. So it builds into basically almost every AP item that Singed would want. And because it builds into almost every AP item that Singed wants, if you only have 400 gold and you need to back, buying this is never a bad option if you just need the AP. However, the other 400 gold option is going to be Ruby Crystal. So now, when do we buy Amp Tome versus Ruby Crystal, assuming we only have 400 gold when we recall? Ideally, you want to have 800 gold in your first recall so you can get both. But if you only have the 400, then the way you think about it is the enemy laner threatening to all-in me at any point? Am I being defensively pushed under my turret? Then you want Ruby Crystal. The other way to think about it is, am I needing to wave clear? Am I able to push aggressively? Am I able to get lane priority? Am I able to proxy? Amplifying Tome. Both of these items will build into your first legendary, usually. So it's not like you're going to make a bad decision by going either or, but there is always, down to the component level, a better option to buy. Blasting Wand. So you are recalling, you have 800-ish gold. Maybe if you have 800 gold and you can get to exactly 0 gold when you leave the fountain, then you want to go Amp Tome and Ruby Crystal. However, if you have 850-ish gold, I say ish for a reason, then you need to think about what you want to buy, because Ruby Crystal, Amp Tome, and Blasting Wand all build into Leandry's, which is, again, generally Singe's most purchased first item currently. I personally think that if you have the gold to spend on a Blasting Wand, you have 850 gold, I think you should just buy it, especially if it's on your first recall. Even after the Singed Q nerf down to 0.8 ratio, Blasting Wand is up from 40 to 45 AP, and the amount of wave clear and short trade damage that Blasting Wand gives you compared to having Amp Tome plus Ruby Crystal, that 50 gold is going to be an Amp Tome plus then some worth of AP. Meaning, in my opinion, if you have 850 gold on your back and you're trying to decide whether to buy these 2 items, Ruby Crystal, Amp Tome, versus buying Blasting Wand, I think Blasting Wand will benefit you more. The thing you have to consider, though, especially with Leandry's now, is having a 1300 gold Haunting Guys, is saving up for this item going to be worth it over buying a Blasting Wand? Because what happens is, now I've spent 800 gold on an Amp Tome and Ruby Crystal, and I need to build towards a Haunting Guys, or get a Blasting Wand, depending on how much gold I have. Is it better to recall on 500 and get Blasting Wand and have 0 gold left over, or recall on 850 and get Blasting Wand and have 0 gold left over? Well, what happens, we can talk about that, but what happens if, I have 500 gold and then some, not quite enough to hit Blasting Wand, but I have more gold than I need to finish Haunting Guys? Well, is Haunting Guys going to make the difference for you in lane? Is it going to help you in lane? Are you playing versus a melee champion? Are trades going to be long enough to where you can use the 6% damage amp of Haunting Guys over 3 seconds and make that worth it? Is the extra 50 health that you get for combining, is the extra 15 AP that you get from combining it going to be worth it? Because you get 10 extra AP on Blasting Wand compared to going Haunting Guys. The general rule is, especially versus melee champions, if you're going to be taking longer extended duration trades, Haunting Guys can really work in your favor, because you will have wave clear with having 35 AP on this item, not quite as much as having Blasting Wand. However, if you're taking very short trades and you're focused more on proxying and farming, and not interacting with the laner as much, then Blasting Wand will benefit you more. Both of these items, both of these component tier items are going to build into Leandries, so eventually when you have this full item, it's not going to matter, but having the decision between these two items, Haunting Guys and Blasting Wand, in the early game and making the right decision there can lead to an easier laning phase. It can win you a laning phase, and it can help you win fights around your grubs in the early game, which is really important. My recommendation to you is if they have, if you're against a melee laner, and plus maybe their jungler is melee as well, and you're going to be taking a bit longer trades against them, then Haunting Guys is your best friend as a component item. The 6% damage amp and the health and AP all combined is going to be a great ball of stats for Singed. Nice effect, then just slam that. However, if you are able to get huge lane prio, proxy, and you're farming it up, then Blasting Wand will benefit you more for the increased wave clear, cheaper cost, easier to just save 850 gold versus going back 800 gold, farming more, going back again, 500 gold for Haunting Guys, going back again, getting Blasting Wand, because the higher AP you have, generally the more you can farm before you have to recall. Meaning that if you get Blasting Wand in your first back of 800, and then you want to build towards this, it's easier to then use the AP that you have from Blasting Wand to build towards the Haunting Guys, as opposed to using the AP you have of an Amp Tome to build towards the Haunting Guys, right? That being said, it's not always possible to save large amounts of gold before you back, and that's a nice part about having Haunting Guys, all the components, is, hey, you know, I had to recall, maybe I have a Blasting Wand and I couldn't quite save enough money to get both of these and an Amp Tome. Well, you can just build the components. You can just even build one component, just get a Amp Tome and boots and walk back to lane, right? That's possible. If you want to spend 1,250 gold, you can do that, because 850 plus 400 is 1,250. Maybe you have exactly 1,250 and to recall, but you don't want to wait 50 gold to get Blasting Wand to get Haunting Guys and not buy a Blasting Wand instead. You want to sit in your fountain and wait for 50 gold and just buy this and then leave, right? Well, you can also just do this. You can get Blasting Wand and Amp Tome and then just walk away. You can get Blasting Wand and Ruby Crystal if they're being very aggressive in melee range, and then just walk back to your lane. It's very fluid. There's a lot of micro decisions that happen. My recommendation to you is, if you're against a melee, Haunting Guys. If you're against range, then Blasting Wand. If you're proxying, then Blasting Wand. If you're farming a lot, then Blasting Wand. If you're trying to take trades in lane and you need the stats to fight, Haunting Guys. You can never go wrong with either, but there are micro level decisions that will impact which component you're buying first. All right, like I said, a lot of information in this video, very kind of deep level component thinking even as well. Moving on to Giant Spelt. The Giant Spelt used to be an item that you bought in your first item slots, component slots every game. Not so much anymore, because Giant Spelt used to build into Demonic. It does not build into Leandries. Leandries is an overall squishier item than Demonic by quite a bit. However, it gives you more damage as a benefit of that, so we like that. So what does Blasting Wand end up building into for Singed? For Singed, the relevant items that Blasting Wand builds into for the early game is just Rylai's or Anathemas. 95% of the time, it will just be Rylai's. The other options that it builds into for Singed are going to be Wormlogs and Anathemas and Randuins. But we'll talk more about defensive items when we get to it. You're generally not going to be rushing defensive items early on that much on Singed, so Giant Spelt is 350 HP for 900 gold, and if you need to get Rylai's, the situations where you would buy Rylai's first instead of going Leandries is going to be against your ranged matchups to have the slow, or if you're against a champion like Darius that just wants to run you down, and having the damage from Leandries won't benefit you there, because he would just all-in you faster than you can damage him, right? This item used to be much more important on Singed's early game, but because our main option most games versus melee matchups will be Leandries, not quite as important. However, if you need to rush Rylai's, then it's the same line of thinking as earlier, where you need to be defensive, Giant Spelt. You need to be offensive, Blasting Wand. Only have a little bit of gold, Amp Tome. Now I have Rylai's, boom, you're good. Alright, Haunting Guys talked about it a bit earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and skip over this one. Fiendish Codex. Now, Fiendish Codex is going to build into 2 big Singed items. I think 3 actually, because it builds into Cosmic Drive. Yeah, so 3 big Singed items Fiendish Codex builds into. It's going to be Cosmic Drive / Crypt Bloom / Riftmaker. Really, you're not gonna, even though Riftmaker has this item in its build path, and Zonya's has it in its build path, or sorry, not Zonya's, Cosmic has it in its build path, and Crypt Bloom has it in its build path too. For all of these items, the other component is more valuable. So with Riftmaker, Haunting Eyes is more valuable in my opinion. With Crypt Bloom, Blighting Jewel is more valuable in my opinion. And Cosmic Drive, either Kindle Gem or Aether Wisp, especially Aether Wisp, is more valuable. The ability haste is the big important part of Fiendish Codex, and ability haste is just not really super important Singe. Like, you want some, but you don't want too much. Other stats tend to be more important, and in general, the level of ability haste in the game this season has gone down, so having a larger amount of it on Singe is not quite as important as it used to be. It still matters in late game to have your ultimate up for every fight, but for the majority of the game, you don't need as much ability haste as you used to. So as far as Fiendish goes, your other components in the items that it builds into will be better for Singed. All right, so Hex Tech Alternator, it's going to be relevant on Singe for 2 items, Rocket Belt or Shadow Flame. For Shadow Flame's case, needlessly, it's just going to be better in my opinion. The 125 burst damage that you gain from the 50 AP Alternator is just not going to matter as much as the extra 20 AP that you would get from Needlessly. That will most likely on Singe give you more damage because of the nature of Poison Trail, damage over time. That will help you more than having Alternator. I think Needlessly is just a better component than Alternator every time if you're going to go Shadow Flame. However, with Rocket Belt, I think Alternator is generally a better component than Kindle Gem because this is 50 AP, whereas Kindle Gem is 0 AP. This doesn't give you any ability haste, but it gives you the ability to build it out of 2 amp tomes, super cheap, combined cost 300, and then you're well on your way to buying a 2.5k gold Rocket Belt, which is going to be quite cheap. It's a good component item. You're not buying it every game on Singed, and the situations where you'd buy it, Rocket Belt, you buy it first before Kindle Gem, and the Shadow Flame, you buy it second after Needlessly. That's about what you need to know about that one. Kindle Gem is going to build into a few Singed items: Abyssal Mask, Anathema, actually quite a few. Abyssal Mask, Anathemas, Rocket Belt, Ending Despair, potentially Visage, and Cosmic Drive. The other components in these items are going to tend to be a bit more valuable, like Negatron in terms of Kindle Gem. For Anathemas, Giant Spell is more valuable than Kindle Gem as well. Ending Despair, Chain Vest is better than Kindle Gem as well. Visage, same thing. The other component is just more valuable. Cosmic, the other component. Aether Wisp is the most valuable in this if you can get it first, then Kindle Gem, then Fiendish. Generally, good component item, not that amazing for Singed outside of the items that it builds into. Aether Wisp, this is going to be a very juicy item this season because Aether Wisp builds into one of the big boys for Singe. Cosmic Drive is going to be a great late game item, especially with that CDR, but the ability, the damaging effect is different now. It just grants you movement speed if you hit a champion with damaging abilities. That's it. No more stupid stacking mechanic. This item gives health again because it builds out of Kindle Gem. I'll talk about it more when we get there, but Aether Wisp builds into this, and Aether Wisp 5% movement speed AP, great for Singe at the early game, especially if you know you're going to be going for Cosmic Drive later. I wouldn't recommend just sitting on it and then buying Cosmic Drive way later in the game. You're going to delay your items too much. But if you're in that rare matchup where maybe you want to get Cosmic Drive first, I'll talk about that, then Kindle Gem is a super strong component item, or sorry, Aether Wisp is a super strong component item if you want to go for that. Generally, though, wouldn't recommend it because you're not going to be rushing Cosmic Drive most games, and these other components, especially Blasting One Haunting Guys, will just be better for you at that price point. Same thing with Winged Moonplate. The items that it builds in your for Singed that are relevant are going to be Deadman's Plate, Warmogs, and Force of Nature. They're all great items on Singed, but you're just not going to be using this item that early to really have it be super necessary on Singe unless you're doing a weird cheese build, which I do like to do sometimes, but that's not going to give you the most consistency in the long run, so I think just don't worry about Moonplate that much. It's going to be a much more heavily advanced tactic that's going to be outside the scope of this video, and for most of you guys, if you rush this item, it's going to hurt you rather than help you, so great component, but stay away from it for the most part. Alright, Chain Vest, kind of same thing. You're really not going to be wanting to buy defensive components too much early on, especially in your first few items. And then later on in the game, when you're buying your defensive items and you decide what components you need to buy, then you can kind of decide more on the fly. If I'm buying DMP, I'm getting hit by a Riven a lot, or, you know, a Jace, Chain Vest. If I need to just run around faster, Moonplate. Do I have enough durability? Do I have enough defensive armor? Do I need to get health instead? You know, you can go double Ruby Crystal, you can even go Moonplate Ruby Crystal, right? things like that. With defensive components, your itemization is much more. Every item is kind of able to be built whenever on Singed. There's a lot of versatility, but defensive components especially, there's a lot of versatility on Singed because your ultimate gives you armor MR, because movement speed is so important, because health is so important on Singed. But what if you have enough already? Well, then you can go towards the other armor MR and make sure that you have enough, right? It's a balancing act. You want to make sure you have the right stats at the right situation. You never want to have too much health. You never want to have too much armor. You never want to have too much MR. But you want to have the correct amount of each while not having too much of any of them. That being said, both these components, Negatron Cloak and Chain Vest, both build out of smaller components, which you can also kind of just sit on if you need to. But yeah, because they're defensive item components, you're not going to buy them early on that much, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. This is the exception, though. Warden's Mail is the exception. Warden's Mail builds into 2 big items for Singed, potentially. Frozen Heart and Randuin's. Frozen Heart is just high armor against physical threats that don't crit, and Randuin's is armor against physical threats that do crit. That's the differentiation of those items. That's all that really matters for those two. The only other thing that might matter is Frozen Heart gives you a whack ton of CDR. Cool, relevant. However, Warden's Mail is potentially a very good early game buy against a few matchups, such as especially Urgot top lane. This is awesome against him because when he pushes his machine gun button, this reduces the damage of each of those attacks, and it's generally a solid armor item because if you need flat armor on Singed, then Frozen Heart tends to just be the best flat armor item in the game. So having this early if you're falling behind in lane versus, for example, like a Set, Riven, Jace, Urgot, things like that can be quite helpful. Obviously, the goal is never to fall behind in the first place, but if you can't help it, then Warden's Mill is nice to sit on, because if you know you're going to buy a Frozen Heart eventually, 1,000 gold, Frozen Heart, dirt cheap, you can sit on it if you need to, right? Alright, so Needlessly builds into potentially 3 big items for Singed. Needlessly Large Rod is up from 60 to 70 AP this season. However, Singed Q did get nerfed from 0.9 to 0.8 ratio, which is a pretty massive nerf. That being said, as far as Zhonya's goes, I think at 45 AP it's better to just get Seekers. As far as Shadow Flame goes, like I said before, Needlessly is just better than Hextech Alternator. And as far as Deathcap goes, you're going to buy 2 of them anyways, so you're never ever really going to buy this item first as a component over any of your other options. These are all late game options for Singed. Zhonya's Deathcap and Shadow Flame, so don't worry about it. It's not going to be super relevant for you. Maybe a cheese build exists where this item first could be good, but especially after the Poison Troll nerf, I just don't really see it. So moving on, we have Seeker's Arm Guard. Seeker's Arm Guard is going to build into 1 item for Singed, that is Zhonya's Hourglass. However, it is going to give you a lot of armor. It's going to give you, I guess there's no more stacking mechanic on it. It just gives you flat 25 armor, and Zhonya's gives you 50. You just buy Seekers if you're going to buy Zhonya's. I mean, that's really it. Zhonya's is there if you need both armor and the invulnerability. Help versus champions that do true damage. Zhonya's, I'll talk about that more when we get to it, actually. I don't want to talk about legendaries just yet. Okay, so Blighting Jewel. Blighting Jewel is the superior component option if you're going Crypt Bloom or if you're going Void Staff. It's just better than the other options because these are both late game options, and at that point, it's okay to not have the higher AP / ability haste of the other component over having the M-Pen, the 13% M-Pen on Blighting Jewel. The gold cost of this was reduced down from 1.3k down to 1.1k late last season, Season 13. Super strong component item on Singed, especially in late game. Builds into 2 great Magic Pen options for him if you need them. Cool. Moving on. Alright, here's the juicy part. We're moving on to AP legendaries. So, Liandry's Torment. I just want to say thank you, Riot Games, for bringing back my favorite item in the entire game. Technically, this was an item that existed in Season 11, 12, and 13, but it was a mana item, and it was not it for Singed. This item is so glad to be back. As a refresher, the reason why Liandry's in Season 11, 12, 13 was not good for Singed, it did not provide any HP, and the reason why Demonic was so bad in Season 11, 12, 13 for Singed was it never dealt enough damage. Liandry's was the one that had all the damage. These 2 items were balanced around stacking with each other, meaning that neither one could be the total package for Singed that he needed it to be. However, Thank you, Riot, for bringing it back in the form that it was in the past, or at least a very similar form that it was in Season 10 and seasons prior. This version of Liandry's is strictly weaker than the Season 10 and prior versions because this version of Liandry's actually has a lower total damage output, meaning lower total burn, and it does not have synergies with crowd control like the old one did, and it does not have 10% damage amp like the old one did. It has 6% instead. That being said, this is by far and away the best item that Singed has had in multiple years now, over the last 3 years plus, now that we're in Season 14. It is arguably his best item. It is an amazing item. It's a super fun item. I love this item. It is his only true core item, and I'm just so happy that it's back. It's an amazing, awesome Singed item. Welcome back, Liandry's. We missed you. So, Liandry's Torment, 3k gold. Ability damage to enemy champions, 2% max health magic damage per second for 3 seconds, so 246% max health damage, no matter what. Magic damage, when you apply even just one tick of Poison Trail, this will tick for 6% max health damage. It is magic damage, meaning that MR does counter it. Suffering is the second passive. The first passive is called Torment, the second one's called Suffering. For each second in combat with enemy champions, deal 2% bonus damage up to 6%. This does stack with Riftmaker, which gives you 2% per second up to 10%. So that would be 10% on that, plus 6% off of Liandry's for 16% on those two items. These are going to be the damage options for Singed, but Liandry's is core and Riftmaker is not. I'll explain why. The reason why Liandry's is core on Singed is because this item is the best item in the game to scale Singed's damage. Flat AP to scale dots does not work in a game like League of Legends, where enemy champions have so much access to health regeneration, healing, shielding, dodging, all these ways to avoid dot damage and just nullify dot damage, mat resistance, right? Dot damage is inherently a different style of damage mechanic compared to what most champions have, which is burst damage. Dot damage has different things that counter compared to burst. Dot damage is countered, again, by shields, healing, sustain, things like that, whereas burst damage is designed to counter, shield, healing, sustain. Dot damage will almost never over-penetrate shields unless you are ludicrously fed. So, for Singed to have a dot damage item that also amplifies his damage output is very important because it makes him a much more total package in terms of how much of a threat that he can be. Liandry's is the only real core item on Singed for that reason. His damage does not scale into late game without it. Even minions become very, very, very hard to kill very quickly if you don't have Liandry's. That's why you almost always need Liandry's in item 1 or item 2 on Singed, or even creep waves just take forever to kill. Never mind cannons. Without Liandry's, cannons will start to take you, 15-20 seconds to kill on Singed, and I'm not exaggerating. They take a long time for him to kill without the I guess I am exaggerating a little bit, but they take a very long time to kill that Liandry's. You will not deal meaningful damage to monsters or Baron or Dragon with that Liandry's. The damage cap on this is actually lower than Demonic was. The damage cap is 50 on this to monsters, whereas Demonic was 100, but you still need this every game, item 1 or 2. It's a general rule. It is his only core item. It is his best item by far. And versus melee matchups, you want to buy this every game, almost every time, with the exception of probably, like I said, Darius, where Rylai's actually, I think, outperforms this item. But if you're ahead, then you can still just slam Liandry's, because it's never a bad option. It's never a bad option, ever. Even if you're against a ranged champion, yeah, it's not optimal, but if somehow you do get your hands on them, it's the highest kill threat. But there are better options against ranged champions, which we'll go over. But yeah, that's the gist of it. It is always item 1 or 2, in my opinion, on Singed. You need it to scale. Without this item, you actually can't even kill cannons, really, later in the game. It is the most important item, super fun item, best item for him, in my opinion. And will most likely be his highest pick rate item for forever, basically. So, yeah, awesome item. Thank you for bringing it back. Other options are going to be Rylai. So Rylai's is 2.6k, 400 health, so 100 more HP than Liandry's, 75 AP, so 15 less AP than Liandry's. Liandry's will give you way more damage than Rylai's. However, the benefit of Rylai's is obviously you're tankier, costs less, and it has the perma-slow if they're in poison. 30% slow for 1 second on Poison Trail and Fling, as far as relevant to Singed. The reason why you would want to go Rhylize before is just obviously the slow. Do they have a Darius that's going to run at you and try and just hit you with his axe and pull you in and try and like execute you, right? Rhylize makes it very hard for him to do that. Do they have champions that don't have a whack ton of dashes, maybe just one dash, and then they're in the fight, and you're behind and you can't finish Landry's? Well, then you can go Rhylize if you're behind. If you're not behind, I recommend to go Landry's every time versus melees, but if you are behind, then Rhylize is an option to potentially keep yourself a bit safer in the side lane as well, and potentially peel your backline a bit better. Speaking of peeling your backline, do they have champions that are going to just be hard diving your backline and trying to kill your AD carry a lot? Well, then Rhylize will help you, one, when you fling them and apply the slow immediately, but two, when you spread your poison trail and they try and get back in the fight again, they're going to get cucked by the slow, right? Lower damage than Liandry's, higher utility than Liandry's. When would you buy this item before Liandry's, though? That's the big question. You buy this before Liandry's if you're against a ranged champion or Darius, because the slow will cuck them, especially ranged champions. The slow will just keep them in your poison trail. The health will make it hard for them to one-shot you or just even all-in you at all, and then you just keep them in your poison trail until they die. Great for team fights as well if the enemy team just for some reason does not have any health stackers, which really doesn't happen in modern League of Legends. They usually have at least one champion that will buy health, and that champion's usually the top laner. But if they don't have any champions that stack HP, then theoretically Rhylize is a better option first than Liandry's because they don't have any health stacking, and then the percent health damage doesn't really matter as much. On Liandry's, it still always matters. You still always want it. Don't get me wrong. You need this on Singed Liandry's, but if they're not going to have health stackers, especially in the early game, then Rhylize will benefit you. But as a rule, if they have a ranged top laner or Darius, then consider buying Rhylize first. If you're behind against a melee champion, which with Singed you should learn to go even or ahead, then Liandry's will benefit you more, much more. But Rhylize, again, if they're ranged and you just get your hands on them and keep them there, or peel your backline, or if they have a champion that's going to just run you down, or if you're needing some defense option versus melee champion, Rhylize will technically make you harder to kill in the side lane, but you're not going to have kill threat on people as often with this item, especially if they're bruisers. If they're ranged champions, yeah, you will have kill threat, but that's because they're just squishy in general. And if you were ahead on them, Leander's will give you kill pressure as well. That being said, this, I would say, some people see it as a core item on Singed. I think it's close to a core item on Singed. I don't think it is quite a core item on Singed because there are going to be games, especially now that we have Riftmaker, where you might not buy Rhylize until much later in the game. Usually what you would do is buy this item 1 or item 2, and swap it, and the other item that you would have would be Demonic for item 1 or 2, but now because we have a third really good, potentially core-ish option, not quite there in my opinion, but close to being core option in Riftmaker, then Rhylize is also going to lose a little bit of importance. Still an amazing item on Singed, still one of his best items, obviously. Still one of his favorite items. But it's not quite as core as previous seasons might. Whereas Liandry's is his one true core item. Those are the kind of situations where I would recommend you buy Rhylize in. Let's talk about Riftmaker. Riftmaker, again, is close to being core on Singed, but not quite. Riftmaker, 3k gold, 350 health, 80 ability power, so less AP than Liandry's, not that it really matters. But because it gives you more damage amp, but it gives you 50 more HP and 15 ability haste. Ability haste stat it's nice to have, but not really relevant. It doesn't really matter that much. Here's the much more important part. One of the passives is called Void Corruption. For each second in combat enemy champions, deal 2% bonus damage up to 10%. At maximum strength, gain 10% Omnivamp. So this gives you, after 5 seconds, 10% damage amp and 10% Omnivamp. Omnivamp is no longer reduced to 1/3 effectiveness on Poison Trail. That is right, you get full effectiveness on damage from Poison Trail for Omnivamp for Riftmaker. And this is the only item that actually offers Omnivamp as well. So, what does this mean for Singed? Well, if you have Rhylize plus Riftmaker, you have potentially 16% damage amplification. Then after 5 seconds, when you hit 16% damage amplification, you're going to get your 10% Omnivamp. Then your damage really turns on. right? These two items together mean that you're not going to be dealing an absolute huge amount of damage whenever you start putting people in poison control at the start of a fight. But hey, after a few seconds, if they don't deal with you very quickly, you're going to be a very, very big threat. With big damage amplification, with big sustain, with lots of more DPS coming out, it's going to make you a problem, basically. And that's good, This item is going to help Singe scale as well. If your goal is to scale for late, and you need a late game option, you better have a Riftmaker along the way, because these two items together, Leander's and Riftmaker, are his two, assuming you're going for a late game setup, are going to be his two core items. Leander's is his only real core, but Riftmaker is going to be there as well for damage amp and sustain. Great Singed item, awesome Singed item. However, again, like every other Singed item except for Leander's, you don't necessarily buy this every single game. If they have majority range champions, then it doesn't really matter if you have Riftmaker, because your goal is not to sustain versus them, your goal is to just get your hands on them in the first place. And it's not going to matter to have this item until way later if you even buy it that game. However, versus melee champions, Riftmaker is just chef's kiss. If they have 2+ melee champions, then Leander's Riftmaker is going to be awesome, because it just lets you shred them, lets you sustain versus them, lets you omni-vamp off of them. You actually get the value off of these two items because you're constantly going to be able to have someone to hit at least. But versus ranged, not quite as important, and that's why it's not core. So moving on to Rocket Belt. This is kind of in the same category as Rylai's, where Rylai's and Rocket Belt are both two options that you can buy potentially versus a ranged champion in the top lane versus heavy range damage comps. The Rocket Belt will actually apply, let me show you, it'll actually apply the slow from Rylai's. You see it's slowed. Rocket Belt will actually, funnily enough, also apply the, or start to stack up your Leander's and Riftmaker, as well as just straight up apply Leander's damage as well. So fun little fact there, in case you guys cared much about that interaction. I don't know if you do, but it's not going to be relevant for most games, but maybe it is going to be relevant eventually. Who knows, right? So Rocket Belt is going to potentially be another option to help deal with ranged champions, in my opinion, potentially. Maybe even a bit better than Rylai's to help deal with ranged champions. It is going to be 100 gold cheaper than Rylai's. It is going to give you a gap closer as well. It's going to give you less ability power. You're losing 15 and you're losing 100 HP compared to Rocket Belt as well. This item does give you 15 ability haste though, and it does give you the gap closer, so you're gonna have more ultimates. You're gonna be able to have more opportunities to open up with an all-in. The gap closer helps you as well versus range champions. What you can also do against it, what I like to do against a lot of range lanes is just go Rocket Belt into Leander's. However, if they have a ton of range champions on their team, and they, like, there are comps, especially in high elo, where the enemy team will draft 5 range champions, then you can also just go Rocket Belt into Rylai's, into maybe like a Frozen Heart third, something like that, itemized really on the fly. And yeah, you will be losing out on your Leander's, so it'll be harder for you to kill minions, but your ability to just catch and just run down these ranged rat champions is going to be a lot higher, right? Obviously, if you can, you want to go Rocket Belt into Leander's if they have ranged, and that way you have your ability to scale damage. It's only going to be plus 600 HP, and so you're going to need to buy a lot of HP really quickly afterwards to help make sure you're not going to get one shot. But that being said, it's still going to be an option, a good option versus ranged lanes. So Cosmic Drive. Cosmic Drive is another awesome option for Singe this season. This item is going to give you, for 3,000 gold, 80 ability power, 250 health, 25 ability haste, which is the single highest ability haste item in the game, I believe, and 5% movement speed. The passive is called Spell Dance, which will grant you 25 to 60 from levels 1 to 18 movement speed for 2 seconds when you deal damage with an ability. This finally works on Singed without needing to take weird runes or build weird items to make it work. It just works when you hit someone with Poison Trail. Shoutouts to Riot Freak for this one. I believe he is the one behind the concept of the new Cosmic Drive, and this is awesome. You buy this on Singed when you just need to move faster and get more ults. That's really it. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about this item. It is an awesome option. It's definitely not a core option, but it is an option that you can buy in most games, provided that you are tanky enough to survive, because it only gives 250 HP. So if you're tanky enough to want this, and you need your ults up, and you need the movement speed, and running fast is a benefit for you that game, then Cosmic Drive is great. Not a core option, but a great potential option for, you know, mid to late game. Other mid to late game options are going to be, you know, these items over here, your Crypt's Bloom, Void Staff, Zonya's Deathcap, and Shadow Flame. Crypt Bloom, we'll talk about this one first. This is one of the new Magic Pen items. This is 2.85k gold, 70 AP, 30% Magic Pen, 15 ability haste. The passive is Life from Death. When you get takedown enemy champion within 3 seconds of damaging them, creates a healing nova on their location that heals allies for 63. Actually, this is different because the amount of healing that you get is actually going to increase based on your AP. So let's see, if I have a bunch of AP, then as you will see, this healing amount actually goes up quite heavily. So now it's going to heal for actually 466. You can't see it in the shop, but in my inventory, if I hover it for you, you can't see past my webcam, but it says 466 total healing. So the potential healing off this item, if you get an assist or a kill, especially late game, if you're AP heavy build, is going to be quite high, and that can change a team fight. What are you going to lose for that heal? You're gonna, well, if you spend 150 more gold, you can gain 10 more ability power and 10% more magic pen. You're going to lose 15 ability haste going Void Staff, but Void Staff is going to be the generally highest DPS option. When do you even buy magic pen on Singe? You buy magic pen on Singe later stages of the game if they're buying MR to counter you. Because we have much more consistent damage on our core item now, Leandries, and potentially tertiary or core-ish item Riftmaker, because we have so much more damage there than we used to, it's not quite as important nowadays to build magic pen like Void Staff or Crypt Bloom on Singed. But because MR options are so strong now, I can see that we might need to end up building these quite a bit on Singed. Out of these two, what would I buy as Singed? Well, as Singed, you're not always the primary damage dealer, so Void Staff might not be quite as important as getting Crypt Bloom. And Crypt Bloom, in my opinion, is going to give you almost as much damage as Void Staff, while giving you the benefit of potentially getting a game-winning heal for your team, because Singe gets a lot of takedowns, a lot of assists, especially. So that healing nova can make a big difference potentially. So I would say in most games, this might be a bit controversial. I know people will disagree with me on this. I think Crypt Bloom will actually be better most games than Void Staff. That being said, Void Staff has been bumped up to 80 AP. Doesn't matter that much for Singe. His Q ratio did get nerfed. I don't think so. I think the potential heal off of Crypt Bloom and the amount of gold that you save makes this item more worth it in most cases than Void Staff. You can't really go wrong with either if you need M-Pen. But potentially Crypt Bloom synergizes a bit more with Singe, so that's what I recommend going most games if you need M-Pen, percent M-Pen. Alright, moving on. Zonya's, exactly what it says. The tagline is called Survive Burst, and this is what you buy if you want to survive Burst. Now, Zonya's is an armor item, so it's like a hybrid item. It's a defensive item as well as a utility item for the, as well as an offensive item for the AP and utility item for the invulnerability. Why would you want to buy Zonya's over an item like Frozen Heart? Well, Frozen Heart is going to give you more armor at a much cheaper cost, over 1,000 gold cheaper than Zonya's. So what does Zonya's give you as a benefit that Frozen Heart doesn't give? If Frozen Heart gives you more armor, well, obviously the damage, 120 AP off of it, but the biggest benefit of Zonya's is when you're against true damage. Champions like Vayne, Camille, Fiora, Master Yi, etc., which have lots and lots of percent max health true damage that literally nothing else in the game is going to help you against besides just having the ability to not get hit by anything. Invulnerable and untargetable that's just going to be the main line of defense versus champions that are just going to jump on you and try and shred you. In team fights, what does Camille like to do? Camille likes to ult the Singed in team fights, trap him so he can't spread his poison, and then hit him with a double Q and just try and nuke him. Zonya's is your best defense against that. What does Master Yi like to do against Singed in team fights? Master Yi likes to just jump on Singed and just right-click him to death, because Singed only has one way to peel himself, which is Fling. The Master Yi is also going to be quite fast, potentially faster than Singed, and immune to slow, so he can just get right back on top of you and keep going and cut you down with true damage strikes. What's your best defense? Zonya's. Does Frozen Heart help against Vayne? I mean, yeah, it slows down her autos, but the armor doesn't really do shit. So the invulnerability of Zonya's is going to help you more against Vayne as well. Fiora, same thing. Does armor help against Fiora? Actually, not really, besides the early game. So Zonya's will actually scale better against champion like Fiora, and having the invulnerability to try and run towards your team and get her into a bad position Invulnerability also stops her from proccing all ticks of her passive as well. So it's your best option against percent max health true damage in general. If you are very rich in a game, I would say you can prioritize this over getting a Frozen Heart because the AP is very valuable. However, this item is very expensive at 3.25k gold. That is more expensive than last season, where it was 3k. So that cost increase, I think, is actually a sleeper nerf to Zhonya's for most champions, including Singed. But it is still the best option against percent max health damage for Singed, so potentially an option if you want to buy it. Not quite as core as core-ish as last season, but still potentially a very good option for Singed defensively. Deathcap, I love Deathcap on Singed. When Singed had the 0.9% AP ratio on Q, this was the second best option to scale his damage, but that has been nerfed. So it's not quite as good, I think, as it used to be on Singed, but Poison Trail is still a 0.8 ratio, which is nothing to scoff at. And Fling is, I think, 0.45 ratio now? It's 0.6. Sorry, my bad. I'm tired. But Fling is 0.6 ratio. Poison Trail is 0.8 ratio. So Deathcap potentially can still be quite good on Singed. It also gives more AP, now it gives 140 AP instead of 120. Magical Opus, I believe, is the same, where it increases your total AP by 35%. This does work with Singe's ultimate as well. The AP you get from your ult will also get amped off of Deathcap. So for Singed, this is not really a 140 plus 35%. It's actually closer to a 240 plus 35% if you consider his ultimate synergy with it. So still obviously going to be a very, very good item on Singed. However, I do think it has some very steep competition from Shadowflame for Singed. I'm not really sure which one's going to be better because of the Q nerf. If it was pre-Q nerf, I would say Deathcap is better at all stages, but because of the Q nerf, Shadowflame is potentially a great option. Now, this is going to give you 120 AP with no AP amplification and 12 Magic Pen. However, it is significantly cheaper than Rebadon's Deathcap at 3.2k compared to 3.6k, so you're going to save 400 gold there. What do you gain that Deathcap does not give? You get the ability to execute with the Cinder Bloom passive. With your poison damage, it will actually crit when they're below 34% health. And I believe this is further amplified for dots. Yeah, 30% increase. Critically strikes enemies below 30% health, dealing 20% increased damage. But if you have a dot damage, it's 30% increased damage. So this could potentially be very, 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 very good for Singed. There's potentially a cheese option here with with Infinity Edge as well, because that will actually amplify the crit from Shadowflame. I doubt we're ever going to do that in a real game, but potentially an option. So the differentiating factor between these two items, besides just the massive ability power that you get off the Deathcap, the 12 M Pen doesn't really fucking matter here, because you're gonna get so late in the game that having this 12 M Pen won't matter for Singed, because this is not a core item for Singed. A lot of champions will have this as their core item, not Singed. For Singed, this is a tertiary item. The differentiating factor, besides the massive AP difference and cost difference, is Deathcap is going to have more damage over the entire course of a fight, whereas Shadowflame will give you way more damage at the end of a fight. So if you just need to just really just make sure that one person's gonna just get obliterated, then Shadowflame's gonna be better. Or a cluster of targets, right? However, if the fights are gonna last a little bit longer, and the higher AP over the course of a longer fight will make a better impact for Singed, then Deathcap is better. And those are kind of your late game options in terms of Singed items: the Crypt Bloom, Void Staff, Zhonya's, Rebadon's, Deathcap, and Shadowflame. Main reason they're late game options is because of the cost. The other reason is because these stats are not really relevant on Singed until late game. Exception being Zhonya's. It could be either a late game or a mid game item, depending on when you need the more. Alright, elephant in the room for AP items is going to be Deathcap. Or sorry, not Deathcap, it's going to be Rod of Ages. This item is down from 2.8k gold to 2.6k. So it is significantly cheaper than it was before. Or it might have been 2.7k, I don't remember. It's cheaper than it was in Season 13. What did we lose for this item being cheaper? Well, no more movement speed on this item. This item used to be great on Singed because, well, one, we just didn't really have great items before in Season 13 and 12 and 11, so having Rod of Ages to just be a ball of stats for us was nice, because then you could kind of like just buy this generically, and then you get the level up eventually, and you'd run faster with this item as well when you got focused, especially because it would give you movement speed charges faster if you're getting hit more. It was great. It was just a giant ball of HP and AP for Singed. Mana was its bonus, and you just bought it because it was just good. Like, but it was never that good that it was like a good item, because Singed didn't really have good items, but you just bought it because what the fuck else were you gonna buy, right? However, now in Season 14, even with this item being 2.6k, which is dirt cheap, tied with Rylai's for gold cost, this item is dirt cheap, but like, when would you buy it though? Because we have so many other great options in Leandry's, Rylai's, Riftmaker, Rocket Belt, Cosmic, like all these items up here in this first row are just way better, I think, than Rod of Ages. I just don't see when you would buy it unless you really need the massive amount of health that this item will give. This item will give you 550 health fully stacked, which is 50 less than it used to give, and it will give you 90 AP when fully stacked, which is 10 less than it used to give, which was used to give 100 AP and 400 health. But it still gives a level up, which is nice. I just don't think it's that important as it used to be, because one, no more move speed passive on this, slightly lower stats, and the biggest reason is we just have so many other options that are just so good. I will tell you what, I will experiment with Rod of Ages and see if this item has potential on Singed. As it stands currently, I don't really think so, compared to other stuff that we have, which is just way better, but might as well try it out, and I'll report back to you guys with what I find. That being said, moving on. All right, this section will not be quite as complicated. Let's talk about defensive items on Singed. So, defensive stats: health, armor, MR, invulnerability, potentially movement speed as well. Frozen Heart is going to be just the best option if they have a bunch of physical damage and they don't crit. It's super cheap. It's going to be 2.4k gold cost after they patch it. 70 armor, 400 mana, 20 ability haste. The mana doesn't really matter. It's nice, but it's not the reason why you buy this item. You buy this item because it's dirt cheap, lots of ability haste, lots of armor, and it gives you the attack speed reduction in AoE and the rock solid passive, which reduces damage by a flat amount from enemy auto attacks for 5 flat plus 0.35% of your HP, capped at up to 20% of the attack's damage. So it's going to be great versus auto attacks that aren't going to crit, and just versus non-crit physical damage in general. So like, this is like a very hard counter to a champion like Ashe, where she just doesn't crit really at all. But even versus crit champions, potentially very good, because it's just so cheap. If you can get it early enough, you can potentially prevent certain crit champions from snowballing. And you have the attack speed slow reduction as well. However, in general, versus actual crit damage, champions like Gangplank and late game crit 80 carries like Jinx, this will be a better option, because it will just give you straight up more survivability versus crit damage specifically. This will not be as good versus champions like Riven, who don't crit but have a whack ton of physical damage, because it's going to give 15 less armor and much more expensive than Frozen Heart. But versus actual crit, again, Randuin's will be a bit better. That's the differentiating factor between Randuin's and Frozen Heart, is just, do they have physical and crit, or do they have physical and not crit? Really easy choice. To make. Frozen Heart is a bit overpowered in Season 14 so far, so potentially an option. The ability haste is quite nice as well. Those are two great armor options. Another great armor option now, Dead Man's Plate. I used to say on stream I don't recommend this item, but now I do recommend this item, but not for the reason you're thinking. This is an armor item, so if they have physical damage, that is a bonus. The biggest benefit of this item now is that obviously you buy it when you want to just move fast across the map and move fast around in team fights, but the other big thing they changed this item is they added a slow resistance effect of slowing resistance of 25% that stacks with swiftness boots. So if you buy these two items, it is potentially 50%. Obviously, it's going to have some diminishing returns baked into it. Movement speed slow resistance that stacks with other sources of tenacity and slow resist from your runes as well. Does that make Dead Man's Plate finally in Season 14 a viable option for Singed again? In my opinion, yes. If you are not getting heavily bursted by the physical damage that they have, but they still have physical damage, then Dead Man's Plate for the movement speed on Singed, awesome option now. If you are getting bursted heavily, Frozen Heart's better. If you are getting bursted heavily by crit or DPS'd heavily by crit, then Randuin's is better. But if they have physical and you're not getting completely shredded and you don't need as heavy of a defensive option and the movement speed's helpful for you, DMP, great. DMP is going to be awesome versus champions like Darius, where they just want to try and slow you and run you down and catch you. It's hilariously good to stack it with Swifties versus Nasus. It actually feels like his Wither just does not slow you anymore. So, this is a great item on Singed again, in my opinion, after the last few years where it's kind of been a bit mediocre because they just have nerfed the stats of this item so hard over time since Season 5 when it's introduced. This item used to give like 60 armor and like 500 HP. Like years and years ago, almost, Jesus Christ, like 9 years ago now. Oh my god, so old. Yeah, when this item was first introduced to League, it was like 60-70 armor and 450 550 HP, 600 HP even. It was awesome. But nowadays the stats are much lower. It's much more of a balanced item in my opinion, good or bad. But I think without the slow resistance this was not worth it on Singe, but with the slow resistance I think very worth it, because you just become, just like it says, you're unsinkable, you're just hard to deal with, you're hard to slow down. Great potential option. All right, here's a new one, Unending Despair. 2.8k gold, 400 health, 55 armor, 10 ability haste. Every 7 seconds in combat with champions, you deal X amount of damage, a flat amount, plus 30 to 50 flat based on your level, plus 3% of your bonus health, magic damage to your enemy champions, healing for 250% of the damage dealt. This is reduced by Ingenious Hunter, potentially on 5-stat going from 7 seconds to about 4.6 to 4.8 depending on your source. I haven't actually timed it myself. But it can be reduced by Ingenious Hunter. This item at 55 armor, 2.8k gold, 400 health can potentially be very, 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 very good against physical damage melee champions that are going to brawl you. Because what you can do is go Leandries, Riftmaker, Unending Despair. Then you have double damage amplification. Then you have Omnivamp on Riftmaker to heal. And then you also have Unending Despair, which is going to give you more healing as well as armor to help you just tank them out. This 3-item combo versus heavy physical damage melee teams will be awesome. So Xin Zhao that jumps on you, Riven, Nasus, Darius, you know, things like that. We're going to be just brawling in melee range, potentially with Conquer and things like that. Very good. When is this item bad? This seems like it's going to be an amazing Singed item. This item is absolutely dog water useless versus ranged champions because they will never stay in the relatively small range. See that? They'll never be able to just like stay in what is the relatively small range of this item, unless you're already on top of them, at which point it's not going to matter, because if someone hits you actually from outside of the range of Unending Despair, it'll actually activate it. You need to have this item go off as you're in combat, like, or in range, to actually benefit you, because what can happen is a ranged AD carry, so imagine that's like Caitlyn over there, right? If she hits you when you're outside of the range, this item actually goes off, but if there's no one inside of the circle, then you're not going to get a damage proc, you're not going to heal off of it. That's why it's better versus melee champions. Okay, so great potential option, only great versus melee champions that are going to brawl you, and you need to sustain. Is it going to be a core item for Singed? Hell no. Is it an awesome Singed option? Yes, absolutely. Alright, moving on. Locket of the Iron Solaris. The reason why Locket's on here is it is one of 2 items in the game that gives you both armor and MR, or sorry, all 3 armor and MR and HP. The other is Jack Show. The way you should look at Locket, it is literally, for Singe's purposes, it's just a miniature Jack Show, and that's it. If you need all 3 of those stats, armor, MR, and health on Singed, but you don't have the ability to save up 3.2k for a Jack Show, this is 1,000 gold cheaper. What do you lose compared to Jack Show? You're going to lose 100 HP, 20 armor, 20 MR, and you're going to lose the resistance amplification passive of Jack Show. Neither of these items will be good if they have true damage. These are both trash against true damage. The reason why you go Locket over Jack Show is purely a economic reason. You need to save gold, and you need to be tanky right now. Not going to scale as well as Jack Show, but if you need to be tanky right now, then Locket is better. Jack Show will scale better, so if you have the luxury of having gold and you're able to save up money for Jack Show, in the long run, this item will scale better. Both are trash versus true damage, though. The only great defensive option versus true damage, no matter what, is Zhonya's. But not every game will have % max health true damage, so moving on, that's kind of the differentiating factor between Locket and Jack Show. Jack Show is no longer a mythic. It is very expensive though, 3.2k gold. It does synergize with Singe's ultimate by giving you the 30% armor and MR after 5 seconds. A potentially cool 3-item synergy between these 3 items is going to be Riftmaker, Liandry's, and Jackshow, where Riftmaker and Jackshow take about 5 seconds to stack up fully, and Liandry's takes a couple seconds as well, about 3 seconds. So after 5 seconds, these 3 items will all 3 be fully activated. Let me show you that right here. You can see my stats. On Singe, I'll go ahead and pop my R here. And I'm going to be starting to get damage application. But after 5 seconds, you'll see my armor MR. Bam, right there. Spikes up. I got Omnivamp now as well. And then after 5 seconds, I'm able to just be a huge delayed threat in combat. That is an awesome concept, I think, for just itemization on Singe in general, is being a delayed threat. Hey, you know, at the start of this fight, I'm not going to be a super noticeable threat. But if you leave me alone and you let my 3 delayed items stack up over time, hey, you know, 5 seconds later, you're fucked, because now I'm gonna be turned on, basically. Not in a weird way, but in like a League of Legends way, where hey, I'm activated now, I'm powerful now. You didn't deal with me, and now you're in trouble, right? So good option. Is it a core option? No. Like I said, the only core option on Singed is Liandry's, and even then, you're not going to buy it first every game. Everything else you're buying reactively depending on what the game holds. So Jackshow or Liandry's, do they have a lot of just mixed damage with no true damage or very little true damage, and you need a defensive option because you're getting blown up or you're at risk of dying fast in team fights, right? Then you buy one of these. MR options, Abyssal Mask. This is still, I think, for Singed, even with the addition of awesome new options for MR, this is still, in my opinion, the best Singe MR option, and it is because it gives you the most damage by leeching the enemy magic resistance. It gives you a high amount of potential MR because you get 9 MR for every champion affected, so 60 plus 9 times 5 potentially, which is quite a bit of MR, at a cheap gold cost, 2.4k gold. Why would you go Abyssal Mask over going Force of Nature? Miniature Cap 1, Force of Nature gives movement speed. Force of Nature gives you potentially, you know, 120 MR now, because 55 plus 70 gives you quite a bit. And movement speed, surely Force of Nature is just always better. Well, no, not always, because Force of Nature, while it gives you a whack ton of MR, it doesn't actually reduce the enemy's MR. The movement speed is quite nice, but you're paying 800 more gold for it, and you're only getting 100 more HP. So for that reason, because of the damage amplification of Abyssal Mask and the gold cost difference, I think it is generally better on Singed than Force of Nature. But Force of Nature is not like terrible on Singed. I just think that with Singed, you always have to consider your damage in mind, because you are a damage dealing champion primarily. So while Force of Nature can be good, only buy this if you actually genuinely need the movement speed. Let's say they have like a Cassiopeia with Rylai's, or Malzahar with Rylai's that are just slapping you with spells over and over and over and over and over, and the movement speed actually helps you, right? Then buy Force of Nature. Otherwise, Abyssal Mask is just going to be way better. Alright, Hollow Radiance is the MR Sunfire. Now, I don't actually recommend Sunfire in Singed, because you have Poison Trail to help you deal match damage and an area effect around you. However, Hollow Radiance potentially is a great option against AP top laners, because this item gives you a combination of MR, health, and wave clear. It has the Immolate passive that Sunfire has. It does not actually amplify the way Sunfire does, but this item gives you that for wave clear, and it also gives you a little pop on minions, or any enemy units. Killing an enemy makes the enemy pop for magic damage around you. It scales for a flat amount plus your bonus HP, 3.5% of it. So it gives you that wave clear. Useful versus champions that are going to harass you a lot, that you need to maybe itemize defensively against early, such as Vlad, Kennen, Lissandra. Top lane AP range top laners like that will be quite good against them, because against melee top laners that are AP like Gwen and Mordekaiser and Rumble, Gragas, you can just buy your normal items, your AP core, Liandry's, and be fine. But versus ranged AP top laners, well, you know, if you are somehow not able to get Rocket Belt and run them down and kill them, or get Rylai's and run them down and kill them, and you would think for that game, if they have multiple AP threats, that getting an MR option that has the wave clear to help you farm up item 2 which is going to be Leandries, is better, then you can kind of lean towards Hollow Radiance instead. Is this better than Abyssal Mask? Hell no. Is it better than Force of Nature? It depends, because Force of Nature is going to be a much more late game oriented option, whereas Hollow Radiance is going to be a much more early game oriented option. Cool item, useful in certain situations when you're versus range AP top laner, but like I said, it's not your only option. Moving on, this item is very cool, however, Canic Rukern. Canic Rukern is 400 HP, 80 MR, a little bit of health regen. The Mage main passive is basically magic damage shield, like how Malphite gets one for AD damage, for physical damage. It is a 20% max health shield, so if we have just a ton of HP, then we can actually really abuse this. Let me just buy this. HP. So you can see here, with 5.5k health, I have a 1105 magic shield. That recharges every 12 seconds after having taken damage. If the enemy champion, or enemy team has a champion like a Syndra, who is just hardcore threatening one-shots on you because you're trying to run into a fight, this item will be absolutely amazing versus that, because Force of Nature doesn't help quite as much against a champion like Syndra, who just insta one-taps you, because it takes a while to stack up. Abyssal Mask does not give as much health as this item. This item gives 400 health, but also gives a lot more effective health because of the shield. And Canic Rukern also gives you a higher flat amount of MR compared to Abyssal Mask, where you need to kind of be in the middle of a team. Let's show you the range of Abyssal Mask real quick. This is the range of Abyssal Mask. You need to be like right in the middle of a team to get the full value out of the MR leech passive of that. So this item you buy as an anti-burst option. That's what it's there for, to make sure you're not getting one-shot by a big AP threat. So things like Syndra, maybe potentially an Orianna that's just like looking to just chunk the absolute hell out of you. Lysandra potentially focuses Singed as well. Do we get against her? Kennen especially just runs in and just pops his R and just, you know, tries to just Kennen all over you. Great against him potentially. Is it better than Abyssal? Not sure. Does it have a wider variety of use cases than Force of Nature? It definitely has a wider variety of use cases than Hollow Radiance. It's have more use cases than Force of Nature. Honestly, for Singed, yeah, maybe it does. But all MR options and all defensive options on Singed in general are going to be, they're going to depend on the situation. So, Canic Rukern, anti-burst. Hollow Radiance, early game wave clear. Force of Nature, run fast. Abyssal Mask, generically the best, but not always the best. Buy it for damage and gold cost advantage. Spirit Visage, I would not recommend in the past, but now potentially great because Singed has access to Riftmaker. So if you are not getting bursted, you need a little bit of MR. Abyssal Mask is not as helpful as keeping you alive, or Abyssal Mask for damage is not as helpful as vamping you and amplifying your Omnivamp with Riftmaker. Potentially Visage could be an option here. I haven't explored it that much. I don't know if it's going to be worth it with Riftmaker, but because Singed does have the ability to potentially heal more now, could be good. I think this item will generally be outclassed by the other options up here for MR, especially Abyssal Mask and Canic Rukern, but potentially viable. Alright, flat health defensive options. I love Anathemas on Singed. I think this item is great. Super dirt cheap, 2.5 gold cost, 650 health, 20 ability haste. Gives you up to 30% damage reduction and reduces the enemy's tenacity that you select when they're near you by 20%. Love this item, especially versus if you just need a very, very cheap defensive option versus a champion that does not deal true damage. So the reason why it's bad against true damage is because the only defensive component of this item is flat health, and this is very bad against percent max health true damage or just true damage in general. However, if they have I love this item versus mixed damage AD carries like Kaisa, Varus, Quirky as well. He's mostly magic damage, but it's good against him as well. Great against mixed damage AD carries to just slap it on them, Ezreal, and just like say, hey, now you deal 30% less damage to me. It's pretty good against them. It's also pretty decent against split pushers. That was the original intent of the item design, was to counter split pushing by just slapping this on the split pusher and then saying, now you just deal 30% less damage to me. Good luck split pushing, right? It is an awesome Singed option because there's a huge amount of health. Singed gets a lot of resistances from his ultimate, so having HP is very beneficial for Singed, especially in later stages of the game. Potentially, you can also cheese rush this item first against lanes. I like to do it against Akali and Rumble, actually. Champions that just kind of like, if they hit one ability, then they just chain hit you with spells until you die. I think it's good against champions like that. In top lane, primarily, the examples are going to be Rumble, Akali. I mean, I've bought it against Jace's in the past, but for 2.3k, 2.4k gold, then Frozen Heart might be better against Jace now. Yeah, it's an option. It's there if you just need a large amount of HP against mixed damage. That's not true damage. Cool. Moving on to Warmog. This item is spicy now. So the health is down from 800 to 750. The gold cost is up from 3k to 3.1k. What did they add? They added 5% movement speed, and the healing passive is the same. Except with the exception of now, when the healing passive is activated, then you also get an additional 10% movement speed. So this item is up to 15% movement speed. This item could potentially be very crazy good on Singed, especially in later stages of the game, especially if they have champions that are poking you, especially if those champions are poking you before dragon fights, before baron fights, and you need to just like eat some poke and then heal up and then come back, activate the movement speed. Great for cross mapping. I need to experiment more with this item. I will say my suspicion is this item will be very insane late game on Singed. Potentially you could buy Anathemas early and then sell it and get Warmogs later for just having a giant health ball. Potentially you just buy this as a 6th item just to have the anti-poke capability. Very good, but maybe not the most necessary compared to other stuff. All right, so moving on, the last item I want to talk about before I get into full builds is going to be Serpent's Fang. This is in its own category. This is extremely situational. This is an AD item. Minish Cap, why would you build an AD item on Singed? Well, Serpent's Fang deletes shields with this effect. Whenever you deal damage, you delete shields. Basically, you reduce them by 50% as a melee champion. Shields absolutely cuck Singed. Shields are never, almost ever, going to be over-penetrated on by Poison Trail. It's just not going to deal enough damage to burst through them, so it's better just to like shred them if you can. Even though it is an AD item, it is a dirt cheap AD item at 2.5k. The stats are absolutely piss useless on Singed. You don't care about AD lethality at all on Singed, but the effect. This effect where it shreds 50% of shields applies on every single tick of Poison Trail. So if the enemy team comp has like Ivern, Lulu, Karma, like stuff like that, where you just cannot deal damage to them, no matter how much AP and Liandry's you have, this item will actually help you deal with them. This item will help you shred their shield. This item is also applied by Rocket Belt, so you potentially, you know, even though they're range champions that are going to shield a lot, you can, you know, wait for someone to get shielded, you know, Rocket Belt forward, and then you apply Serpent's Fang, and all of a sudden half their shield's gone, right? That is an option. Just potentially a very, very niche item on Singed. This is not something you're going to buy most games. This is not something you're going to buy more than once every 100 games, maybe. But in that one game where you do need it, if they just have a whack ton of shields, this does work on Singed in a pinch, so awesome. All right, moving on to full builds, guys. All right, guys, some full build examples. I know this video is already very long, but I just want the information to be there because I know that people will need the information. So, full builds on Singed, I will show you a few, and then I'll explain kind of step by step thinking why you would want to build XYZ items at a 6 item level on Singed, and what different types of 6 item builds you can have, because, you know, with so many different item options, naturally you're going to have different 6 item loadouts, right? So I would say the most bog standard boots on Singed, like I talked about before in the boot section, is going to be Swifties, so we'll just use that as our generic boots placeholder. That is a placeholder. This can swap with your tabbies or your mercs depending on what you need, right? However, like I said, this first one will be the most bog standard, just kind of generic Singed build, and for that, Liandry's is our only true core item, so we just buy that kind of generically. Now, let's say they have 2 to 3 melee champions. Well, the best option against 2 to 3 melee is going to be Riftmaker. It gives you the most damage against them, gives you the most sustain, gives you a nice little bit of CDR, most damage amplification as well. I never actually talked about the Void Infusion passive. This is just the old Demonic Embrace passive, which gives you health for, or AP for buying health. It's not really relevant you never think about this whenever you're buying Riftmaker. It's just there as a bonus to give the item gold efficiency, basically, is what that's there for, to help balance it. Okay, so that's a nice little 2-item, like first 2 items versus 2 or 3 melee champions enemy team. So say they have like, I guess a Daria, or not Daria, Set top lane. Maybe they have like a Xin jungle. Then they have maybe even a Leona support, any 80 carry that's in range, we'll just say Trist or Varus or Ashe, and then any range mid laner, you know, Orianna, Syndra, maybe a Jace mid or something, right? Things like that. This is a great core, Leandry's core plus Riftmaker potentially versus melee champions, because it's just going to give you, these items excel when you can actually hit people, right? So after that, well, what do I buy Minish Cap? I have my core items. What's good after that? Well, Rylai's is never bad on Singed because it just gives you great stats, and so you can just generically buy that if you don't know what else to buy. But if you are kind of aware of the situation and you know that you need to start buying a bit defensively here because there's a lot of damage in Season 14 as well, well, now because they have a bunch of melee champions, what defensive items for me are good against melee champions? Well, Frozen Heart's great against the physical. Abyssal's good against magic damage, so do I need armor and MR? That can go Abyssal and Frozen Heart, and then maybe top it off with a Rylai's at the end. Now I have a 6-item build that is great. But in most games, you won't probably need to go double defensive items on Singed. I would say you're probably okay to just go Rylai's third, because this first build is the most bog standard generic Singed 6-item build. These are like your most bog standard, just generic first items on Singed that are just always at least okay to build and never bad. Afterwards, I will say the most bog standard armor item could probably be Dead Man's Plate, because you have a lot of armor on your ultimate, and for most situations this will just work great for Singed as an armor item. And then if you do still need MR, then you go Abyssal Mask. If you don't, then I would say to scale your damage, go ahead and buy a Crypt Bloom, or to get a Cosmic Drive afterwards. I think for safety's sake, for this first standard build, I will just go ahead and recommend Abyssal Mask, because that's going to be the most just generic option. But here you go. That is a just all-around great Singed 6-item build. With your ultimate, you'll have 407 AP. You'll have damage amp off of your Leanders and Riftmaker, and you will shred melee champions, and you'll be decently tanky versus the few ranged threats that they have. Alright, so what do we buy then? As a little variation on this, if I just want to have a bit more damage. Okay, if I want to have a bit more damage, and I have Leandry's and Riftmaker, and actually making sure my poison control hurts is a concern, well, hey, guess what? I can go Crypt Bloom now. And now I have double damage amplification, triple AP items with Magic Pen. And if I'm not having trouble surviving, if I just need, you know, just to make sure that people are actually going to die, then you have a few more options. You can go Riftmaker, or sorry, not Riftmaker, you can go Deathcap and Rylai's for HP and AP, and all of a sudden I have 680 AP non-ulted, and I'll have 816 AP with my ultimate. Deathcap's gonna give me 140 plus 212 here, which is a little ridiculous, but yeah, that's an option. Especially if they have MR, then Crypt Bloom is there. If you need to have a gap closer against ranged champions, then I'd recommend getting a Rocket Belt somewhere in there just to have that dash. It's good against that. If the problem with Rocket Belt, though, is Rocket Belt can get outscaled in a 6-item build because the item is just not made to be very slot efficient. So what do you do if you're getting outscaled on Rocket Belt? You need to buy a better item. Well, that's what your Cosmic Drive is there for. That's what your Dead Man is there for, to give you a double movement speed option to be able to make sure that you're going fast enough to keep up, but not lose out on too much damage, because you want your Cosmic Drive still to actually give you DPS, right? So there's eventually types of items that you want to buy if they have magic damage, or sorry, MR is a Crypt Bloom, plus potentially, you know, a defensive option in there. Maybe throw a Zhonya's in there for a little bit of armor. If you need their armor and vulnerability. It is expensive, but like I talked about before, that would be good against the true damage portions of that, and then maybe they have just a bunch of, you know, mixed damage. Hey, guess what? Jack Show. And all of a sudden you have invulnerability, and then while you want to make sure that you get hit before you activate that, because then while you're considered in combat, Jack Show will activate fully. Then you pop out of Zhonya's, and then you have, you know, your fully activated Jack Show. You're healing from Riftmaker while you're in the middle of that, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're sacked up, ready to go. Then you fight. All right, so 6 item build versus what would I build if I'm against a ranged matchup and they have a lot of ranged champions on my team in general. All right, so ranged matchups. I'm against Jace top lane, or like maybe a better example is even Kalista top lane, because people like to play Kalista top lane, and they have a Kindred AD carry, and they have a ranged AP mid laner, and they have 2 ranged support, ranged support and ranged AD carry bot lane, right? All right, against the ranged rat comp, we would go Rocket Belt, and then either Liandry's or Rylai's, probably Rylai's if they have 5 ranged. Then we're going to want to grab a defensive item, probably Frozen Heart, for armor against that. You want to grab another cheap MR item for their mid laner and the support, Missile Mask, and grab Liandry's eventually. It's very tricky itemizing against comps like this, because you never want to get your Liandry's too late. And if you can afford an item 2, I would say just go just buy Liandry's item 2 against 5 ranged champions, and then build into your Rylai's plus defensive options. And a build like this would make you very, very hard for ranged comps to deal with. But if you buy Liandry's too early, then you can eventually spend gold that you can't afford to spend because you need to buy your cheaper items first. Benefit, though, is because this build is so cheap that maybe you can finish it fasting at Liandry's later on if you need to. But like I said, as a general rule, Liandry's should only be item 1 or number 1 or item 2 on Singed. Item 3 is going to be a bit too late. So for that reason, Rocket Belt, Liandry's, and then Rylai's could be very good against ranged champions to just make sure your damage is actually scaling up, right? Are full tank options viable on Singed? I don't think so. I don't think it's possible to just go Liandry's and then stack a bunch of tank items, because the problem is this is not going to give you any extra AP, really. It's not going to give you, like... It's just not going to give you the value that you need on Singed to make sure that your damage matters, right? Like, yeah, Liandry's will give you damage, and that is nice, but this is a 0 armor, 0 MR, like 1000 HP target dummy, and look how slowly Liandry's is killing it, right? With only 160 AP, with only 1 damage amp source, it takes forever to actually kill this dummy with 0 armor, 0 MR, 1000 HP. And you can absolutely forget it. For example, if they have a dummy that has, let's just go ahead and jack this dummy up a lot. We'll give it 3k HP. Let's give it 2.8k HP. We'll give it, 100 armor and MR. And then I'll show you with this type of setup, it's going to take you absolutely forever to kill this. Even with my ultimate up, it's going to, like, meaningless damage. This is demonic embrace levels of damage. This is absolutely useless. Whereas, instead, if what we did was have an actual, setup that is able to deal with these types of champions that are going to be tankier, something like this, and then maybe I throw a Zani's in there, and maybe I'll throw, like, just for shits and giggles, a death cap, and go, now, even though I have 5 AP items, I still have 3k health, and I want to try and fight you. Well, guess what? Look at the difference here. That's the difference. That level of DPS difference is nuts, to be able to actually have that much damage. That's why making sure that you're not overbuying any XYZ stat, but still making sure that you're buying the right items at the right time is such an important skill on Singed, because if you grief your build, Singed can become very hard to win with very quickly. I'll never say that Singed can become a bad champion if you buy the wrong items, because no matter what, if you have Liandry's, the champion will be decent if you have Liandry's. But you can gimp your build so hard on Singed that if you're buying the wrong item at the wrong time, or just the wrong item at the right time even, then you can kind of be screwed over, right? So those are examples of some full builds on Singed. Generally, again, just to outline the overall rules, Liandry's always item 1 or 2, in my opinion. Rylai's if you need the slow. You buy Rylai's first if they have a ranged champion or Darius. You can also optionally buy Rocket Belt first if they have the ranged champion. Rocket Belt not great versus Darius, though. I'll make a full runes guide as well, probably in a few days when my voice heals from making this video, because holy shit, this video is very long, but it is something to consider versus ranged. And then you just kind of, after your first couple items, you kind of top it off with whatever you need for the rest of the game, right? So you're always thinking, all right, I have Liandry's, what do I need next? Melee champions, Riftmaker. Ranged champions, Rylai's. Need the gap closer, Rocket Belt. Do they have a lot of MR all of a sudden? Crypt Bloom, right? Void Staff. What do I need for the next stage of the game that will give me the most effectiveness combined with the highest scaling possible, right? Do they have a lot of physical burst? You know, if I have my 2-item core and they have, you know, Jace, Riven, Darius, shit like that, Present Heart, cool. Do I need the movement speed and I'm able to survive versus that? Dead Man's Plate. Do they have a Gangplank and do they have, like, Jinx? Randuin's, right? Do they have a lot of everything? Maybe I go lock it and just try and survive that way for a cheap cost. And if I have gold, I can go Jack Show instead. Do I need a large amount of HP because a Cho'Gath's eating me? Anathema's, right? Do I need to survive against a Camille, Fiora, Vayne? Zonya's. Very situational. Very situational. Singed itemization is very reactive. And itemizing on him, genuinely, it is a skill, right? There is no one true real 6-item build because the items that you buy are always going to be a little bit different depending on the game that you're in. But the most consistent item that you will buy is going to be Liandry's, and even then, like I said before, Liandry's, you're not even guaranteed to buy it first every game. You're going to want to try and buy item 1 or 2, but it's not a guarantee, right? So I know this is a lot of information, and I'm very happy that you guys stayed to the end of the video and kind of let me talk your ear off about this. But itemization is a large part of Singed, and just knowing what to buy when and what items are good in what situations, what items are bad in what situations is very important. I tried to create general outlines and general rules, but there are so many exceptions to those rules that it kind of warrants the length of the video, I think. So this is the item guide for Sin for Season 14. This will be a small part of, I think, the eventual much larger Singe guide for Season 14. And this video is already very long, so yeah. Bit of an information bomb. That being said, guys, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it very much so, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace, guys. Mwah!